Kevin and Gabby. Welcome to this session on forests and using technology to protect forests and what's out there. I just wanted to say a few words. My name is Mark Golson. I have the privilege of managing the Mara Elephant project in Masai Mara. But more and more over the years, we've moved into forest areas. So I'll say just a few words about the forests in our ecosystem, and then hand over to some of the panelists, and I've got some questions to tease out some of the information. But they're pretty straightforward. So we really started as an anti-poaching team, and as we grew, we saw that a lot of the issues surrounding habitat protection and the water towers in our area became more and more important. So, for example, the Loita forest and the Mao forest, which is Kenya's largest water tower and the source of the famous Mara River, became paramount to our protection work. And some of the real challenges that we've had in forests, and I think that will also come up today, is that it's a very difficult terrain to cover, poor connectivity, so for LoRa networks, not being so feasible, terrain, GSM coverage very poor, and really the remoteness of the forest due to the topography and of course the very thick cover. And another challenge has been that forests have been a very good place for people to hide out when they're doing their illegal logging or bushmeat, etc. And so when we've actually been able to frustrate some of the logging, we've had some issues around the community. It's sort of amassing to let them out at the forest, the logging roads and logging trails coming out of the forest to sort of let out their buddies who are inside. And I think that another big challenge that we've had, and a major one in our area specifically, has been the larger logging cartels who are very powerful. And what happens with that is that the indigenous communities and the communities living around the forest have been powerless to people from the outside coming into the forest. So I'd like to just share a couple of statistics from World Resource Institute, a global forest review, who've created outputs to show a loss of 11.1 million hectares of tree cover loss in 2021 in the tropics. Of particular concern are the 3.75 million hectares of loss that have occurred within tropical primary rainforests. So, areas of critical importance for carbon storage and biodiversity, equivalent to the rate of 10 football pitches per minute. So I just heard a presentation in this same room this morning to show that 80% of their forests were destroyed by a typhoon. So it's not just illegal logging, but there's also climate change and different things happening around the globe. And I think I can say with some confidence that one of the most important things we're all facing is habitat loss and forest protection in the future. So with that sobering information, I'd like to invite our panelists, Gabby, Marketa and Kevin, to give us some in-depth information on what's happening around the world, what their projects are doing, and how we can work better to understand forests, forest protection, and develop future plans to both frustrate, ultimately stop the level of destruction, and see what's happening around the world in terms of forests. And I'd like to do that by asking a few questions of the panelists. So welcome and thank you for coming today. I might sit down, so I'm not standing over you, but
So I'm really happy to be here from that point of view, because I always feel like so much technology is focused on research or anti-poaching, and operations actually manage a huge part of the overall budget and could use a lot more technology, I think, to be more efficient and practical in the work.
So maybe you could tell us a few words about how you actually use the technology in the forest.
So in the operations, the function is basically to support all the important departments to be able to do their work. So I have aviation, we have 2 aircraft, ULM for the surveillance mainly and Cessna for logistics. We have a fleet of about 16 vehicles and then some heavy machinery for the roadworks. And then also logistics, infrastructure and constructions. That's very complex in the Odzala context because we have 3 different operational bases and 2 more offices in the major cities. So the logistics and the distances are really complicated. We are about 700 kilometers from the capital. And then just to move from our headquarters, which is in the south sector of the park, to the eastern base is about 5 or 6 hours by vehicle. And then another 3 hours to get to the north. We only have a bit over 100 kilometers of roads inside the park, but we have to maintain those and the ones outside the park as well, because we are dependent on those, and otherwise they would not be accessible and the park would not be accessible. Luckily enough, we have a big part of tar road around the east and north of the park, which is quite helpful. And then, of course, in the operations is all the procurement, stocks, and also technology. So from the technology that we use, mostly all is focused on either communications, tracking in the field, or data collection. So all the communications is internet dependent. So that's our biggest thing. We have 2 VSAT installations at the southern and eastern sector, and the northern will be added soon enough. And then in the cities, we use more GSM-based modems or fiber when possible. We are hugely dependent on WhatsApp, on communications. So each of my division has at least one group where are all the relevant people, and then we have more groups across the different departments and the management of the park. So actually the other time that there was an outage for like 2 hours of WhatsApp, we were quite disabled.
Yes, that happened just the other day, didn't it?
Yeah. And then all the communication in the field is at the moment with the Garmin only. We have tested some other types of communication, like the PTT satellite radios, just does not work well enough in Odzala to be worth the cost of the benefit of the direct talking. We are lucky enough to be in an area that's very safe, so we do not have any problem with the security. We do not have rebel groups around or anything like that. I do hear sometimes from people working in the anti-poaching that the Garmin trackers are not sufficient to tactical operations.
Is that the InReach?
Yes, yeah. But they are definitely the most suitable in the context of Odzala, because we are not under huge pressure security-wise, as I mentioned, and you do either have the SOS button for like if it's a matter of life or death, or you have time to sit and send a message.
So it actually links very well to my next question for Gabby, which are, what are some of the impacts you've seen by using Global Forest Watch data to monitor and protect forests?
Yeah, so we work with a lot of local partners in order to make that data impactful. We've also developed a lot of monitoring tools beside our normal Global Forest Watch platform. We have a mobile app that brings deforestation alerts on the ground. We have a mapping tool called Map Builder that allows you, it's kind of like a DIY GFW where you can upload your own shape files. It gives you access to the GFW shape files and has a lot of the analysis, on-the-fly analysis capabilities that you can then share with your partners. We have a small grants fund where we actually fund local groups to use this data into action, and we work with media and journalists quite a bit. So we, through our work, we know that a lot of local partners have been able to report on some of the deforestation events, and that has actually led to law enforcement actions. We've worked with journalists, for example, reporter Brazil reported on the environmental effects of the Belo Monte Dam. And this led to the contractors having a $300,000 fine from public pressure from some of these journalistic outcomes. And then in 2020, we were really curious to see, are we actually getting impact from our data? Because it's one thing to have data, and it's another thing for people to actually use it and to have a result of mitigating deforestation. So we did this assessment study, an impact assessment study in 2020 across Africa and Latin America. And from there, we did find evidence that when forest protectors do have access to this data, it has led to a reduction in deforestation. We did this study across 22 different countries in Africa. It led to, we found an 18% reduction. Within tropical countries is where we did the monitoring, and we looked at areas that were being actively monitored through GFW subscriptions before they were being monitored with GFW subscriptions to look at that decrease. And we actually designed it to be able to show the minimal effect. So it's possible that the effect of that is more. So that's really encouraging to us that there is a decrease in deforestation when they're being actively monitored. So we're hoping to be able to continue to increase that, to continue to follow that, and we'll have continued impact evaluations periodically to ensure that we're really meeting our targets and that data is really being in the hands of those who need it.
I mean, it's so interesting that you say that because, and as users, everyone I think here are users of ER, and one of the outputs that we've been getting have been the GLAD alerts, and they've been coming in quite frequently and showing forest cover loss. And then we're able to send to our patrol teams with the inReaches the coordinates of those, and lo and behold, they're actually very accurate. So from a satellite-based output, almost, and not real time, but almost real time, I think 2 weeks, something like that.
8 days, yeah.
8 days, yeah. So we were able to
That's
actually
great.
go and do bus using satellite outputs and the technology on the ground. So this is a good segue.
Can I just add to that
Yeah.
as well, that we have 2 new deforestation alert products and kind of a third one. So in addition to GLAD alerts, because GLAD is a 30-meter resolution
Right.
product, we've developed Sentinel alerts, which is 10-meter resolution, and radar alerts so that we can see deforestation with cloud cover. And then we put them all together into an integrated alert so that you can have, you can prioritize areas where maybe all 3 alerts were triggered. So you can know, yes, there was really a high confidence that a deforestation event happened there.
It's been very helpful, and I wanted to actually ask Kevin is, what are some of those emerging technologies that you see in the future would be very helpful to do that protection?
Yeah, so some of the emerging technologies that I see coming in, not so much on the protection side, but more on the kind of research side, which can still be tied to protection. Yeah, I mean, just a quick statistic on forest loss. You know, like if we lose 10% of forests, especially like tropical rainforest, it's actually been shown to equate to a 20% loss in wildlife due to kind of movement ecology and things. So, you know, a 10% loss in habitat, forest habitat, equates to a 20% loss of actual, you know, wildlife. So it's like, you know, disproportionate loss for the wildlife that live within the forest. So you know, it's really important that we can kind of, you know, monitor those wildlife as well. And one of the things that I see as a kind of short-term emerging technology, so I'll do short-term and long-term. I think eDNA is going to come in place. Has anyone used eDNA in here for kind of within any research? So it's kind of like eDNA has been around for a long time. So eDNA is just environmental DNA. So, you know, you've all heard of DNA. You've probably seen it on like crime forensics programs and things. So eDNA has been around for a long time, and it's been pretty cost prohibitive. And only in like the last kind of year or two of those costs really dramatically reduced to the point where we could start using it and implementing it more in like survey methodologies. There's kind of lacking in the indices to how we work out you know, data beyond kind of just presence absence with eDNA. So you take a sample of water or soils or, you know, leaf litter or, you know, scat samples, that kind of thing. We can analyze the DNA within there to find out, you know, what species are present and which species are absent from those DNA samples. So I see kind of in the short term that technology really coming into play, and you know, as it goes on, it becomes more kind of prevalent in research. There'll be more kind of research methodologies and indices to be able to equate that beyond presence and absence to more kind of like abundance data. So I see eDNA as being an emerging technology. That's something that within the XPRIZE, a lot of the teams are implementing eDNA and eDNA capture within their autonomous systems. I see like an increase in like remote sensing technologies. So, you know, satellite imagery getting So like Landsat is going to be replaced pretty soon. So that will come with like much higher resolution imagery. So we'll be able to capture higher resolution imagery of the forest as well as everywhere else on the Earth. Spectronomy being higher granularity being put on satellites as well. So being able to capture that remotely is going to be kind of a short-term emerging technology. And also kind of automation of sensor placement. So at the moment we have to go out, we have to walk a long way to be able to put in things like camera traps, all kinds of surveillance systems. I see that process being automated within the next kind of 5 years. Being able to send out, whether it be drones or some other kind of technology that will be able to put those sensors in place, remotely. So places that are really difficult to get to, during kind of rains or something like that, you'll be able to deploy these sensors fairly easily using autonomous technology. And then kind of airborne surveillance as well. I think that will come into play a lot more. So there'll be a lot more kind of sensors put on airborne systems as the cost comes down, just technology costs coming down and making it more available to kind of technologists with it working within conservation. And then kind of long term, and I'm going to go a bit crazy now, but that's like me putting my X Prize hat on. And I think bioacoustics and bioacoustic mimicry is going to be a big thing, like kind of 10 years on, and being able to kind of communicate more. We don't know enough about how wildlife, how their brains work, and being able to kind of decode some of those calls and from birds, all kind of vertebrates, big large herbivores, actually decoding some of that bioacoustic data to be able to kind of communicate with them a little bit more, and by that I don't mean like a Dr. Dolittle type scenario. I mean more like being able to use it to our advantage to kind of coexist, and by kind of manipulating, say, migration routes of elephants through using this kind of bioacoustic mimicry to be able to direct
call from one side
to kind of direct them away from, say, crops and settlements, and where traditional migration paths might go straight through some of those settlements, and causing huge conflict issues. I see the use of this bioacoustic mimicry to be able to kind of manipulate those migration routes to plan and put in new migration routes, and be able to kind of strengthen wildlife corridors in between protected areas by using that kind of mimicry to communicate with.
Very interesting, and it sounds like there's so much about to happen, so much out there. And Marketa, I'll ask you, you've heard from both the technology side and the sort of overwatch side, what do you feel is kind of missing in where you work in terms of technology and some of these challenges?
So thank you. So practically for the management, I'll start again with the internet, because it's just such a basis for everything. So we can develop all the best technology, and without a good internet in the park, we will just not be able to use it. So just for example, we have 3 or 4G network around 60 kilometers away from the headquarters, and we have like 50-60 meters Airtel tower, 100 meters from the headquarters, and it runs on VSAT, and it's 2G network. So if you're lucky, you get twice a day a WhatsApp message through on that. So if we actually had a GSM network, we would save a lot of money that we could use for something else in the protection. Then I think there is a lot of options in the forest for the detection technology, because, for example, in Odzala we have over 220 buys, we call it. It's the natural openings sustained by the elephants in the forest. So actually, even for the ranger patrols, they can always deviate the patrol to kind of get to that place if it would be useful for something.
Right.
And it's also the places where the animals concentrate and where the poaching actually happens. So practically, we do not really send anti-poaching teams randomly in the forest, because the main plant family we have is called Marantaceae, and it's just completely closed. You do not see nothing. So they can only follow existing like elephant paths. but then still it's so random, there is not much point. So most of our deployment is based on intelligence
Open, right?
or controlling these spies where the poaching would happen. So acoustic detection systems based on in these areas would be, I think, really helpful. I know that's already in the development. So I'm saying what we need, even if it already exists, because I'm hoping someone will come afterwards and tell me, this would be perfect for your park, because we are so busy, and then you lose the bigger picture.
Right here.
When you're on the ground, you lose the bigger picture, and you don't find the time to search for all the options that exist, elsewhere. It's a bit complicated. And then, as Kevin was saying, in the devices with the environment, we just need really rugged and durable devices.
Right.
We are now struggling, for example, a little bit with the newest Garmin model because it says all the fancy maps and smaller battery. So we don't need these maps, I need that the guys who use it, who are very often illiterate, are able to send a basic message and that it will last, so that we don't have to send multiple power banks or we don't have to cut time of the patrol because of the battery. So the messages that I can get, for example, from a boat driver is engine fell to river, help send need.
And you can program those messages, right? Yeah, that's quite cool about the InReach, is it has sort of a couple templates you can.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that for us it has to just stay really simple, and the battery is always important. And then I always thought that I would not need fires in the rainforest, but because we do have part of savanna in the south of the park, we do actually still use quite a lot of the detection of fires. We do put manual in the EarthRanger fires that we do from the management, and then we of course get from the Global Forest Watch automatic reports.
Those are FIRMA, is that firm or firms? Is it
or the models
We use veers and
Well, I mean, I see we're running a little bit over, but everyone I'm sure wants to skip lunch and continue. It's a very interesting panel. But I did want to just ask everyone what some of the, maybe we'll go from left to right. What are some of the things that give you hope about what we're doing in your work to protect these special places?
Oh, me.
Do it.
Okay.
Do you want me?
No, let's start doing it,
All right.
Abby, and come back.
Well, as I mentioned, I think that impact assessment for us was like a big aha moment because we didn't have any proof that what we were doing is actually working. And that study was peer-reviewed and published in Nature Climate Change. So we know the methodology is solid. And I think that as technology is improving, and it is, when we started Global Forest Watch, and it really wasn't even that long ago, I think it launched in 2014, we really just had annual data of tree cover loss at a 30-meter resolution. And then it moved to near real-time detection. Now we have 10-meter resolution. Now we have more information about why tree cover loss is happening. Now we have information about carbon. We're getting more and more information, and it's growing, substantially. And the technology is becoming more and more widespread as well. So for me, seeing that assessment and then seeing where the technology is going, as long as it's really being used and we're targeting it correctly, to me that gives me a lot of hope that we can really have impacts and make differences in what's happening.
Oh, well said. Yeah.
Thank you. For me, I think one of the things that does give me hope is that actually the country keeps the park as a protected area, even though there is probably a lot more money that would come from other use. We do have a lot of logging and mining in the region around the park. But the fact that for the government it's still worth it to keep the park as a park and not to sell it out, that's really says something. And then also my team, I think, because they are so hardworking and it's their own national park, the fact that they see it and appreciate it and they really want to work for that is really nice.
Yeah, I think just building on that, global awareness of what's going on, is at the forefront of everyone's minds now. everyone's aware that certain kind of practices, the just pulling minerals out of the ground and things like that isn't okay, and the movement towards kind of rewarding countries for keeping their protected areas and establishing kind of community reserves, and funding those reserves through hopefully something better than just carbon credits, and we move towards like biodiversity credits,
Right.
to benefit those kind of communities, as well as kind of an awakening, I suppose, of conservation NGOs being more susceptible to working together and collaborating. Like this EarthRanger conference is just one of those,
Right.
where everybody's really happy to share their experiences and share their kind of knowledge, and really just helping each other and getting for the greater good. And I believe that community efforts are going to be huge, and as the younger generation within kind of local communities are coming up, they've grown up with access to the internet, smartphones, they're a lot more educated. One of the questions we get asked within X Prize is, Western technology being used within indigenous people, can they do it? Can they actually use it? And that's kind of an old way of thinking, really. These guys can use it,
Right.
and they're more than capable of using technology, to help, add, observe and protect their areas. Whether it's not just, 80% of forest environments aren't in protected areas, they're
Right.
community areas. So the move towards funding those communities directly through biodiversity credits, and recognizing that those communities can actually conduct good conservation practices, and with the use of these technologies to add the surveillance there, it can kind of de-risk the investments from donors, who are then able to kind of make sure that the funds that they're giving over to these communities are having an impact, because they've got access to data from all of these different technologies to be able to prove that they're actually,
why it's important, why it needs to be protected, and how that's going to be done.
Yeah. So I think that's I've given 3 answers there. But.
No. Well, and before we get to a few quick questions, I also wanted to try to tie up some of what's been said. And one of the things that comes out is, if technology can work in the forest environment, it's going to work in other environments because it's the most harsh. For the X Prize, maybe it's a challenge to put up for Marquetta, GSM blimp or tethered drone or something, so you can have GSM coverage. I wonder how that would look from the satellite imagery. A 50-foot blimp above, that would throw off some indicators. But it sounds like all those are tying together to really tell a story, and have definitive data that you can actually both understand what's happening, and then use technology as well in terms of what's happening on the ground, but also the remote sensing, and bringing those together to be able to help park management make solutions and help protect their areas, but also for awareness and for as you'd said as well, for what's happening in these areas, by putting out there outputs that are irrefutable about some of these extremely important areas. So thank you very, very much for that very detailed and important information for, I think, all the users here today, who I'm sure will now be getting your cards and trying to find out how they can use some of this technology in their own areas of work.